The first thing people noticed wasn't the music. It was the silence. Hundreds of guests filled the Grand Aurora Ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan, dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos worth more than most families earned in a year. Crystal chandeliers scattered golden light across polished marble floors, while a live orchestra played softly beneath conversations that sounded rehearsed rather than genuine. Chicago's most powerful politicians stood beside billionaire investors. Judges laughed with celebrities. Corporate executives raised crystal glasses while pretending not to notice the armed security stationed discreetly around every entrance. No one admitted why they had come. Everyone knew. Tonight wasn't really about the children's charity hosting the gala. Tonight belonged to Enzo Moretti, the most feared mafia boss in the Midwest. The man whose influence stretched from Chicago to New York, from politicians to ports, from construction companies to federal investigations that somehow disappeared before reaching court. No one looked directly at him. Not because he demanded respect, because fear had taught them not to. Enzo stood alone near the ballroom's tallest windows, overlooking the glittering city skyline. At 39, he possessed the quiet confidence of a man who had survived enough violence to stop proving anything. His black tuxedo fit perfectly against broad shoulders. His dark hair was brushed neatly back, revealing sharp cheekbones and steel gray eyes that missed nothing. He wasn't smiling. He almost never did. Guests approached only when absolutely necessary. They congratulated him, praised his generosity, thanked him for donations that had quietly rebuilt hospitals, schools, and orphanages across Illinois. Then they walked away as quickly as politeness allowed. Nobody stayed longer than a minute. Nobody wanted to, because kindness from Enzo Moretti always came with questions nobody wanted answered. Marco Vitale, Enzo's oldest advisor, stepped beside him carrying 2 glasses of champagne. "They're nervous tonight. They're always nervous." Marco handed him 1 glass. "You donated $10 million. They're not afraid of generosity. They're afraid of wondering why." Enzo glanced across the ballroom. "They should be." Marco chuckled quietly. "You've terrified half the room without saying a word." "I spoke yesterday." Marco nodded. 3 men disappeared. They made unfortunate decisions. They testified against you. They lied. Neither man continued the conversation. Neither needed to. Across the ballroom, cameras flashed as reporters documented the charity event. Most stayed carefully outside the invisible circle surrounding Enzo. Except one. Nora Bennett lowered her camera. She had spent the past 3 hours observing him, not photographing. Observing. At 32 years old, Nora had built a reputation as one of Chicago's most relentless investigative journalists. She had exposed political corruption, corporate fraud, and several high-profile criminal organizations. But she had never written about Enzo Moretti. Not because she lacked evidence, because every witness either disappeared or became too frightened to speak. Her editor had warned her before tonight. "Don't provoke him. I don't provoke people. You provoke everyone. I ask questions. Not him." Nora smiled. "Especially him." Now, standing only 20 feet away, she realized something unexpected. He looked lonely, not sad, not miserable, simply isolated. People approached him with rehearsed smiles and left with visible relief. Nobody laughed naturally around him. Nobody interrupted him. Nobody disagreed. Every conversation ended exactly the same way, with someone apologizing for something that required no apology. Power surrounded him. Connection did not. Nora walked toward him. Several nearby guests immediately noticed. Conversation stopped. One senator quietly whispered to his wife, "She's making a mistake." Another businessman muttered, "Someone should stop her." Nobody did. Marco noticed first. He leaned toward Enzo. "The journalist? I know. Should I handle it?" "No. She's been watching you all evening." "I know. That usually means trouble." Enzo took another sip of champagne. "So does breathing." Nora stopped directly in front of him. For 3 long seconds. Neither spoke. The ballroom seemed strangely quieter. Even the orchestra felt farther away. Finally, Nora extended her hand. "Nora Bennett." Enzo looked at it. then at hair. I know who you are. I'm surprised. You've written about everyone except me. I don't publish stories I can't prove. And yet you're standing here. I like gathering evidence. A faint smile almost appeared on Marco's face. Almost. Enzo ignored the offered handshake. What evidence are you hoping to find tonight? Nora studied him carefully. The truth. You think you'll find it at a charity gala? I think people reveal themselves when everyone else is pretending. Enzo's expression remained unreadable. You believe I'm pretending. I believe everyone in this room is... She glanced around the ballroom. They're pretending to admire you. They do admire me. They fear you. Fear earns respect. No. She shook her head gently. It earned silence. Several nearby guests subtly moved farther away. Nobody wanted to hear this conversation. Nora didn't seem to notice. Orcare. I've interviewed war veterans, hostage negotiators, former gang leaders, trauma psychologists. They all describe power the same way. Enzo finally became interested. And how is that? The more powerful someone becomes, the fewer honest conversations they have. Marco shifted slightly. This was becoming dangerous. Not because Nora was insulting Enzo, because she wasn't afraid enough to stop. Enzo set his champagne glass onto a nearby table. You've studied me. I've studied people. And? You want my professional opinion? No. I'm giving it anyway. Another long silence settled between them. Then Nora looked directly into his eyes. Not around them. Not away. Into them. Everyone watching expected insults, threats, security. Instead, she spoke softly. You're not dangerous. Several champagne glasses froze halfway to waiting lips. Someone near the orchestra actually gasped. Marco instinctively took one step forward. Enzo lifted a single finger. Marco stopped immediately. Nora continued. You're just lonely. Silence. Absolute silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Nobody seemed to breathe. Enzo stared at her without blinking. Most people believed his expression looked angry. Marco knew better. Enzo looked confused. Nobody had ever said those words to him. Not in 39 years. Not his enemies. Not his allies. Not the women who claimed to love him. Not even himself. Nora wasn't finished. You built an empire where everyone obeys you. You can buy politicians. You can silence witnesses. You can make powerful people disappear. She took one slow step closer. But you can't make anyone tell you the truth. Another. You don't scare me. Another. I pity you. The room collectively forgot how to breathe. Marco had seen Enzo order executions for less. Much less. Instead, Enzo asked one question. Why? Nora seemed surprised. Because beneath everything, the money, the bodyguards, the reputation, the violence. I've never seen someone look more alone in a room full of people. For the first time in years, Enzo had no answer. He had negotiated with presidents, outsmarted federal prosecutors, survived assassination attempts, destroyed rival families. None of it prepared him for one woman quietly describing the emptiness he had spent decades refusing to acknowledge. Marco stepped forward again. Mr. Moretti. Enzo raised his hand. No. Marco frowned. No? No. Nora picked up her notebook. I should leave. You think this conversation is over? I think it accomplished exactly what it needed to. And what was that? She smiled. The first honest conversation you've probably had in years. Then she turned and walked away. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. Every guest watched in stunned disbelief as the journalist disappeared into the crowd completely unharmed. 5 full minutes passed before Marco finally looked at Enzo. I've prepared a team. For what? If you want her followed. No. If you want her investigated. No. If you want. No. Marco stared. She just called you lonely. I heard her. She publicly humiliated you. No. Enzo continued watching the ballroom entrance where Nora had disappeared. She did something far more dangerous. Marco waited. Enzo's voice became almost a whisper. For the first time, someone looked at me and wasn't afraid. Outside, rain began falling over Chicago. Inside the glittering ballroom, surrounded by politicians, billionaires, celebrities, and men who would kill on command, Enzo Moretti found himself thinking about only one person, the plus-size journalist who had called the devil a coward and somehow walked away alive. He told himself he had already forgotten her. He was wrong. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. It washed over the glass walls of Moretti Tower, turning Chicago's skyline into blurred streaks of silver and blue. 48 floors above the city, Enzo Moretti stood alone in his office, with the lights turned off, watching thunder roll across Lake Michigan. His security team believed he preferred darkness. They were wrong. Darkness simply required less pretending. Behind him, the enormous office remained untouched. The imported whiskey on the shelf had not been opened in months. A perfectly cooked dinner sat untouched on the conference table, growing cold beside stacks of intelligence reports. Marco Vitali quietly entered without knocking. "You haven't eaten." "I'm not hungry." "You've said that since Monday." Enzo never looked away from the rain. "What do you need?" Marco placed a thick folder onto the desk. "The Bennett investigation." Silence. "You ordered us not to investigate her." "I changed my mind." Marco nodded once. "I noticed." He had noticed because 24 hours after the gala, Enzo had asked only one question. Where does she go when she's not writing? Nothing more. No threats. No surveillance orders. Just curiosity. Marco opened the folder. Nora Bennett, 32 years old, investigative journalist for the Chicago Tribune. I know that. She lives alone. I know. She volunteers every Wednesday evening at St. Gabriel Youth Center. Enzo turned slightly. Volunteers? Marco raised an eyebrow. Surprised? A journalist working unpaid? She teaches writing classes to teenagers. Enzo remained silent. Marco continued. Parents died in a car accident when she was 19. Scholarship student. Graduated top of her journalism program. Refused 3 television contracts. Writes because she believes newspapers still matter. Enzo slowly walked toward the desk. No criminal record. No financial debt. No hidden accounts. No suspicious relationships. Marco closed the folder. She appears painfully ordinary. Enzo almost smiled. Nothing about her is ordinary. Marco studied him carefully. In what way? She wasn't afraid. Marco Sahil. Fear isn't always weakness. No, it keeps people alive. Enzo looked toward the rain again. So why didn't it keep her quiet? Marco had no answer, because neither of them understood Nora Bennett. Across the city, Nora Bennett sat inside a crowded newsroom, surrounded by ringing phones, flashing computer screens, and exhausted reporters chasing tomorrow's headlines. Her editor, David Collins, threw a newspaper onto her desk. The mayor resigned. I saw. The hospital fraud investigation exploded. I know. So why haven't you written a single word today? Nora stared blankly at her monitor. I've been thinking. David folded his arms. That's usually dangerous. She laughed softly. I met someone strange. David pulled up a chair. A politicien? Worse. A billionaire? Worse. He lowered his voice. Moretti? Nora looked up. How did you know? David sighed heavily. Because you're still alive. She leaned back. Does everyone honestly believe he's a monster? No. They believe monsters are easier to understand. And him? Nobody understands Enzo Moretti. David became unusually serious. Listen to me carefully. If he talks to you again, walk away. Nora frowned. Why? Because powerful men never forget people who embarrass them. She looked out the newsroom window. I don't think I embarrassed him. No, I think I confused him. David laughed once. That's probably worse. That Friday evening, Nora arrived at St. Gabriel Youth Center, carrying a box filled with donated notebooks. Teenagers filled the old community hall with laughter. Paint peeled from the walls. The heating system barely worked. The building survived almost entirely through donations. To Nora, it felt more honest than every luxury ballroom in Chicago combined. A teenage boy named Ethan waved excitedly. "Miss Bennett." She smiled. "Did you finish your article?" "I rewrote it 3 times." "Good. Now rewrite it a 4th. He groaned dramatically. "You hate making things easy." "No. I hate people settling." The room erupted into laughter. Nora spent the next 2 hours helping teenagers write stories about their neighborhoods, families, and dreams. She listened more than she spoke. She encouraged more than she criticized. By the end of class, every student left smiling. She stayed behind to clean the room. The elderly janitor approached quietly. "You missed one." He pointed toward a folded piece of paper lying beneath a chair. Nora picked it up. It wasn't a student's assignment. It contained only 1 sentence. "You were wrong about him." No signature. No handwriting she recognized. She frowned. "Did someone leave this?" The janitor shrugged. "I didn't see anyone." Outside, a black luxury sedan slowly drove away. Inside the back seat sat Enzo Moretti. He watched Nora through rain-covered windows until she disappeared back inside the building. Marco sat opposite him. "You left her a message." "I asked someone to." "You promised no contact." "I broke the promise." Marco rubbed his forehead. "This is becoming unhealthy." Enzo ignored him. "What did you see?" Marco glanced toward the community center. "A woman teaching children." "I saw someone who never performs kindness." Enzo remained silent. Marco continued carefully. "You're smiling." "I am not." "You almost did." Enzo looked away. "Drive." Weeks passed, then months. Neither of them admitted they had begun quietly orbiting each other's lives. Nora noticed strange coincidences. Whenever she investigated dangerous corruption cases, anonymous evidence arrived before deadlines. Threatening witnesses suddenly agreed to testify. Corrupt officials disappeared from public office overnight. No explanations, no fingerprints, only impossible luck. Meanwhile, Enzo continued reading every article she published. He never missed one. He criticized her grammar in private, admired her courage in silence, ordered his legal team to secretly protect newspapers that refused political pressure after she exposed corruption. He never told her. She never knew. One rainy evening, Nora left the newsroom after midnight. The streets were nearly empty. She heard footsteps. 3 men emerged from a nearby alley. Not ordinary criminals. Professional. One smiled. "Miss Bennett." She stopped walking. "We'd like to ask you a few questions." She instinctively stepped backward. The tallest man grabbed her wrist. "Come quietly." Another reached toward his jacket. Everything happened in less than 2 seconds. A black SUV slid sideways across the intersection. Its headlights flooded the street. 4 men in tailored black suits stepped out almost simultaneously. No shouting, no warnings, only terrifying efficiency. The 3 attackers froze. The tallest one whispered, "Moretti." Fear instantly replaced confidence. Before anyone fired a weapon, a calm voice echoed from inside the SUV. "Leave." Just 1 word, nothing more. The kidnappers ran. Not walked, ran. Within seconds, the street became empty again. Nora stared toward the vehicle. The rear passenger window lowered only halfway. She could see nothing except part of a black suit and a pair of gray eyes. She knew them immediately. "Enzo." Silence. "You've been following me." Another pause. Finally, his voice emerged from the darkness. "No. I've been making sure no one else could." The window slowly closed. The SUV disappeared into the rain before she could say another word. Nora stood motionless beneath the streetlights. Her heart raced. She should have been angry. She should have been frightened. Instead, she found herself asking the question she never expected to ask. If he truly was the monster everyone feared, why did he keep saving people without asking for credit? And why? Had he never once asked for anything in return? Miles away, inside the moving SUV, Marco finally broke the silence. "You could have let your men handle it." Enzo kept watching the rain through the window. "I did. No. Marco smiled knowingly. You handled it. Enzo said nothing, but for the first time in years, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago had begun measuring his days by whether or not he had seen Nora Bennett smile. For the first time in years, Nora Bennett couldn't stop thinking about a man she had promised herself she would never trust. She replayed the moment again and again. The black SUV, the frightened kidnappers, the single command, leave. One word. No threats. No violence. No unnecessary display of power. Yet 3 armed professionals had fled as if death itself had spoken. That wasn't normal. Nothing about Enzo Moretti was normal. 3 days later, Nora sat alone inside her office, long after everyone else had gone home. Chicago glowed outside the newsroom windows, its skyscrapers reflecting across the dark Chicago River like fractured mirrors. A blank document remained open on her computer. Title: Who is Enzo Moretti? She stared at it for almost 10 minutes, then deleted it. Not because she lacked evidence, because she had too many questions. Every official record painted him as a criminal. Every rumor described him as a monster. Yet every first-hand encounter contradicted that image. He donated hospitals anonymously. He funded orphanages. He had just prevented her kidnapping, without asking for recognition. None of it fit. Someone knocked softly on her office door. David Collins stepped inside carrying 2 cups of coffee. You've been staring at the same screen for an hour. I know. You writing? I'm trying. About Moretti? She looked up. How do you always know? David smiled tiredly. Because you're making the same face you made before exposing City Hall. She accepted the coffee. What if everyone is telling the same story? Because nobody bothered checking if it was true? David's expression became serious. Nora, I'm not defending him. I know, but you're questioning him. That's my job. David leaned against the doorway. Just remember, the truth and survival don't always choose the same people. Across the city, inside Moretti Tower, Enzo sat at the head of a conference table surrounded by 12 senior members of his organization. Massive digital maps covered the walls. Shipping routes, financial reports, satellite image. The atmosphere felt more like a military command center than a corporate boardroom. Marco pointed toward the largest screen. The Romano family has expanded into South Chicago. They've bought 2 judges, 3 shipping inspectors, and someone inside City Hall. Enzo remained silent. Another advisor spoke. We should retaliate tonight. No, they're testing us. I know. They'll think we're weak. Enzo calmly folded his hands. They already think that. The room fell silent. Only Marco understood. Enzo wasn't distracted by fear. He was distracted by something far more dangerous. Nora Bennett. After the meeting ended, Marco stayed behind. You've canceled 3 operations this month. They weren't necessary. You've also increased security around 1 journalist. Enzo finally looked at him. Your point? My point, Marco Sahil, is that you're protecting someone who would probably publish your obituary if given the chance. A long silence followed. Then Enzo answered quietly. Good. Marco blinked. Good? That means she still believes she's free. Nora refused to let the mystery consume her. Instead of investigating Enzo directly, she investigated his victims. Or at least, the people newspapers called victims. The results confused her even more. A businessman who publicly accused Enzo of extortion had secretly stolen pension funds from thousands of retired workers. A politician who claimed Moretti threatened him had accepted millions in illegal campaign donations. A real estate developer who disappeared 5 years earlier had been trafficking undocumented workers. Every story became more complicated the deeper she looked, not cleaner. Messier, the lines between criminal and protector blurred until they almost disappeared. Late one evening, she visited Father Michael Donovan, an elderly priest who had spent 30 years serving one of Chicago's poorest neighborhoods. He welcomed her into the quiet church. I wondered when you'd come. You knew? You've been asking questions. She smiled. I'm becoming predictable. No, just determined. She sat across from him beneath stained glass windows glowing softly in the fading afternoon light. I want to ask about Enzo Moretti. Father Michael remained quiet. After several seconds, he asked, as a journalist, or as a woman? Nora frowned. What difference does it make? A great deal. She looked away. I don't know. The priest nodded thoughtfully. When my church roof collapsed 12 years ago, the city refused funding. I remember reading about it. The next morning, workers arrived. They rebuilt everything. No signature, no cameras, no publicity. Who paid? Father Michael smiled gently. I never asked. You knew. I suspected. Moretti. The old priest nodded. He made one request. What? That nobody ever thank him. Nora's confusion deepened. Why? Father Michael looked toward the stained glass. Some people don't believe they deserve gratitude. Those words lingered in her mind long after she left the church. Meanwhile, across the city, Enzo entered an abandoned warehouse near the docks. Rain hammered against rusted steel walls. His bodyguards remained outside. Inside waited a man tied to a chair, Councilman Richard Hayes, one of the city's most respected politicians. Now trembling, I can explain. I'm listening. It wasn't personal. Enzo slowly walked around him. You sold children's hospital land. I had debts. You accepted money from Romano. They threatened my family. You lied. Hayes began crying. They would have killed me. Enzo crouched until they were eye level. Do you know why you're still alive? The councilman shook his head. Because someone reminded me that fear makes people lonely. Hayes looked confused. Enzo continued quietly. I'm trying something different. He stood. Return every dollar. Confess publicly. Resign. If you disappear again, I won't offer another chance. He walked away. Hayes stared in disbelief. Nobody had ever left one of Enzo's interrogations alive without paying in blood. Marco waited outside. You let him live. He'll tell everyone. I hope he does. Marco studied him carefully. She really changed you. Enzo answered without hesitation. No. He looked toward the rain. She reminded me who I was. Before I forgot, that weekend, Nora attended another charity fundraiser. Smaller, far less glamorous. She almost left when she noticed a familiar figure standing near the balcony. Enzo. No security surrounding him. No politicians. No cameras. Just one man staring over the city. She walked beside him. You keep appearing wherever I go. I was invited. So was I. Neither spoke for several moments. Rain tapped softly against the glass roof above them. Finally, Nora broke the silence. I've been investigating you. I know. You knew? You asked difficult questions. I found something strange. Enzo remained calm. You help people. Sometimes, you also terrify them. Often, which one is real? He smiled faintly. Both. She folded her arms. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one. Nora looked directly at him. I don't understand you. I don't expect you to. You could. I could. Another long silence. Then she asked quietly, why didn't you let those men take me? Enzo looked toward the rain-covered skyline. Because they weren't going to ask questions. They were going to make you disappear. She felt a chill despite the warmth inside the ballroom. You knew. I know, Romano. You've been protecting me. I've been preventing unnecessary funerals. She stepped closer. This isn't about duty anymore. His jaw tightened. You think you know what this is. I think you're afraid. For the first time, Enzo laughed. A quiet, genuine laugh. It lasted only a second. You still believe I'm lonely. I know you are. He met her eyes. And you still believe you can fix me. Nora shook her head slowly. No, I think only you can do that. For a brief moment, neither of them noticed the man watching from across the ballroom, hidden behind a marble pillar. A photographer silently lowered his camera. He wasn't from the press. He worked for Salvatore Romano. He had just captured the first clear photograph of Enzo Moretti standing beside Nora Bennett. Within an hour, The image reached Romano headquarters. Salvatore studied it without speaking. Then he smiled. So, the great Enzo Moretti finally has something worth losing. He slid the photograph across the table toward his son. Find the journalist. His son frowned. You want her dead? Salvatore slowly shook his head. No, I want her alive. He looked once more at the photograph. A lonely man can survive bullets. But hope, he smiled coldly. Hope destroys empires. Far across the city. Nora stood beside Enzo beneath the ballroom lights, completely unaware that a single photograph had just transformed her from an investigative journalist into the most valuable target in Chicago. The first bullet never came. That was what frightened Enzo the most. Professional enemies rarely rushed. They waited, observed, learned routines, discovered habits, and then they struck only once, at exactly the right moment. 3 days after the charity gala, Nora Bennett noticed something strange. The coffee shop she visited every Tuesday suddenly had 2 unfamiliar customers who never touched their drinks. A black SUV remained parked across from her apartment every evening. Whenever she crossed the street, she caught the same silver sedan reflected in shop windows. She wasn't imagining it. Someone was following her. The question was, who? Inside Moretti Tower, Marco projected dozens of surveillance photographs across a massive conference screen. Every image showed Nora walking to work, leaving the newspaper office, buying groceries, teaching children at St. Gabriel Youth Center. Enzo's jaw tightened. How long? Marco answered immediately. 6 days. They're getting closer. They're becoming bolder. Another advisor pointed toward one enlarged image. Roofline. Enzo looked. Across the street from Nora's apartment stood a man pretending to repair electrical equipment. He wasn't an electrician. His posture gave him away. Military. Patient. Watching. Marco folded his arms. Romano isn't planning an assassination. No. Enzo agreed. He's studying her. Across town, Salvatore Romano calmly played chess alone inside his mansion. His grandson entered quietly. Grandfather? Salvatore didn't look up. What have we learned? The journalist lives alone. Good. She teaches children. Better. No security. Excellent. The boy hesitated. Shouldn't we kill her? Salvatore finally smiled. You don't destroy a king by attacking the king. He slowly moved a white bishop. You remove the queen. The boy frowned. But she isn't his wife. No, not yet. Nora tried convincing herself she was simply becoming paranoid. Journalists often imagined they were being watched after publishing controversial investigations. Still, something felt different. Late Friday evening, she left the newsroom carrying a stack of documents. Rain soaked downtown Chicago. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement like rivers of gold. Halfway home, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Hello? No voice. Only breathing. Slow. Deliberate. Then, click. The line disconnected. Her stomach tightened. That same night, Enzo sat inside a black SUV parked 2 blocks away. He had watched the entire call unfold through binoculars. Marco lowered his own. They're testing her. They're testing me. Enzo opened the door. I'm going. Marco immediately grabbed his arm. No, you can't. If Romano wants you to react, he already has. Without another word, Enzo disappeared into the rain. Nora reached her apartment building moments later. The lobby lights flickered. The elderly doorman wasn't at his desk. Unusual. Very unusual. She stepped toward the elevator. The doors opened. Empty. As she entered, a quiet voice echoed behind her. I wouldn't. She spun around. Standing inside the shadows. Enzo Moretti. Black overcoat soaked by rain. Hands inside his pockets. Completely calm. What are you doing here? The elevator. What about it? Don't use it. Her heartbeat accelerated. Why? He simply pointed upward. Confused. Nora stepped back into the lobby. 2 seconds later, a violent explosion ripped through the elevator shaft. Steel screamed. Glass shattered. Concrete dust erupted across the entrance hall. The elevator cabin collapsed nearly 10 floors. The blast knocked Nora off her feet. Enzo caught her before she struck the marble floor. For several seconds, she couldn't hear anything except ringing. When the dust settled, she looked toward the destroyed elevator. If she had entered, she would have died instantly. Her voice barely emerged. How? Did you know? Enzo slowly released her. Because Romano doesn't waste opportunities. Within minutes, police flooded the building. Bomb technicians examined the elevator. News helicopters circled overhead. Television reporters gathered outside. The official explanation appeared less than an hour later. Mechanical failure. Nobody believed it, especially Nora. At 2 in the morning, she sat inside a temporary police interview room wrapped in a gray blanket. Detective Samuel Brooks entered carrying coffee. No fingerprints. No explosives recovered. No witnesses. He sighed. Officially, it was an accident. She looked directly at him. It wasn't. I know. You know? Samuel quietly closed the door. My father worked homicide. He investigated organized crime. He always said, if an elevator explodes at exactly the moment someone steps inside, it isn't bad luck. Nora swallowed hard. You think someone wants me dead? Samuel looked at her with genuine concern. I think someone wants you terrified. Outside the station, Enzo waited alone beneath the rain. No bodyguards. No security convoy. Only silence. Nora walked toward him. You knew. Yes. You didn't warn the police. They would have arrived too late. You've been following me. I've been protecting you. She stopped only inches away. I never asked for protection. No. You asked for honesty. His gray eyes never left hers. So here's the truth. They're hunting you because of me. The words landed like ice. Nora stared. What? Romano believes you're my weakness. And are you? Enzo didn't answer immediately. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago struggled to lie. Finally, he spoke quietly. I don't know. The confession haunted him all night. Inside Moretti Tower, Marco found him standing before enormous windows overlooking the city. You told her. I had to. That makes her panic. No, Enzo answered softly. It gives her a choice. Marco frowned. What if she walks away? Enzo remained silent for a very long time. Then, so she lives. The next morning, Nora packed a suitcase. Not because she intended to disappear, because every instinct told her she had become something she never wanted to be. A target. Her phone vibrated. Unknown number again. This time, a message. He can't protect everyone. Attached was a photograph. Here. Leaving the youth center yesterday, someone had been standing less than 20 feet away, watching, waiting. Another message arrived seconds later. Tell Moretti to surrender, or the next picture won't be taken from a distance. For the first time, real fear replaced curiosity. Not fear of Enzo, fear for everyone around her. Across Chicago, Salvatore Romano admired another freshly printed photograph. Nora reading the threatening message. Perfect. Exactly as planned. He poured himself a glass of expensive whiskey. His son entered. She's frightened. Good. When do we strike? Salvatore smiled coldly. We already have. He tapped the photograph. The strongest fortress always falls from the inside. That evening, Nora stood alone outside St. Gabriel Youth Center. Children laughed inside. Parents waited patiently near the entrance. Ordinary life. Beautiful life. The kind she had spent years protecting through journalism. She suddenly realized, as long as she remained near them, every innocent person became another possible victim. She quietly turned away. Before she could leave, a familiar black SUV stopped beside the sidewalk. The passenger door opened. Enzo stepped out. Neither spoke immediately. Rain began falling once again. Finally, Nora whispered, They're right. His expression hardened. About what? I've become your weakness. Enzo slowly shook his head. No, you've become the reason. I finally have something worth protecting. She looked into his eyes. For the first time, She didn't see the feared Mafia boss. She saw an exhausted man carrying the weight of an empire alone. Without thinking, she reached out and gently touched his face. The world seemed to stop. Enzo closed his eyes for only a second. It was the first human touch he had accepted without suspicion in nearly 20 years. Neither of them noticed the telephoto camera hidden on the rooftop across the street. Another photograph. Another weapon. Miles away. Salvatore Romano received the image within minutes. He smiled. The war begins tomorrow. And for the first time, Enzo Moretti realized that loving one honest woman would cost him far more than his empire. It might cost him her life. Rain fell over Chicago like a curtain between two worlds. One belonged to ordinary people rushing home from work, umbrellas tilted against the wind, unaware that a war had already begun around them. The other belonged to men who ruled from the shadows. Men who measured victory not by money, but by what they could take away from another man's heart. Tonight, those two worlds were about to collide. Enzo Moretti stood alone inside the rooftop garden of Moretti Tower. The city stretched endlessly beneath him, every light representing a life he could never live. Marco quietly approached. Our safe houses are ready. The convoy leaves in 20 minutes. Enzo didn't move. And Nora? Marco hesitated. She refused. Silence. I expected that. She said she won't spend the rest of her life hiding. Enzo closed his eyes briefly. That's exactly why Romano chose her. Across town, Nora stood inside the empty newsroom packing the last files from her desk. David Collins watched helplessly. You don't have to resign. I do. This isn't your fault. If people around me start dying because of me, I stop being a journalist. David shook his head. You exposed corruption for 10 years. You saved countless lives. And now? She looked out the rain-covered window. Now I'm the story. She hated it. She had always believed journalists should tell stories, never become them. That evening, Nora arrived at St. Gabriel Youth Center one final time. She intended to say goodbye to the children without explaining why. Inside, laughter filled the gymnasium. Teenagers argued over basketball. Small children painted colorful murals across old walls. Everything felt wonderfully ordinary. Until the lights went out. Complete darkness. The laughter stopped. Someone screamed. Then, gunfire erupted outside. Black SUVs crashed through the front gates. Masked gunmen flooded the parking lot. Parents rushed to shield their children. Teachers barricaded classroom doors. Chaos spread within seconds. Nora's heart nearly stopped. Not because she feared dying, because there were children inside. Half a mile away, Enzo's phone rang. Marco answered first. His face drained of color. They hit the youth center. Enzo didn't ask how anyone knew Nora would be there. He already understood. The photograph. The rooftop. Salvatore had never been chasing Nora. He had been waiting for Enzo to choose her. Without another word, Enzo grabbed his coat. The youth center had become a battlefield. Smoke poured through broken windows. Car alarms echoed across the neighborhood. Children cried beneath overturned tables. Nora pulled two frightened sisters into a storage room before locking the door. Don't come out. What about you? I'll be right back. She lied. She had no idea whether she would survive the next 5 minutes. Outside, the first black SUV exploded. Enzo's convoy smashed directly through the attacker's blockade. His security team deployed instantly. Professional, precise, disciplined. The gunfight that followed lasted less than 3 minutes. But to Nora, it felt endless. She helped an injured teacher crawl towards safety while bullets shattered brick walls around them. Suddenly, strong arms pulled her behind a concrete pillar. She looked up. Enzo. Blood ran down the side of his forehead. His breathing remained calm. You came, I always will. Another explosion interrupted them. Concrete rained from the ceiling. Enzo instinctively wrapped his body around hers, shielding her completely, exactly as if his own life no longer mattered. Across the parking lot, Salvatore Romano stepped from a black limousine. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He didn't need one. Hundreds of armed men surrounded him. He smiled across the battlefield. You've changed, Enzo. Enzo slowly stood, keeping Nora behind him. You brought children into this. Salvatore shrugged. I brought you. You chose the location. The older Mafia boss laughed quietly. There he is. The man who once believed emotions were weaknesses. He glanced toward Nora. She made you soft. Enzo answered without raising his voice. No, she made me human. The words stunned everyone nearby, even Marco, because Enzo Moretti had never admitted weakness, never admitted love, never admitted needing anyone, until now. Salvatore sighed almost sadly. I warned your father. He refused to listen. He believed love could exist in our world. What happened to him? Enzo's eyes darkened. You murdered him. No, Salvatore calmly replied. Loneliness did. The sentence lingered in the cold night air. Then Nora stepped forward. Before anyone could stop her, she looked directly at Salvatore. You think fear makes people powerful. It only makes them alone. Salvatore studied her. So that's why he chose you. Nora shook her head. He didn't choose me. We found each other. For a brief moment, nobody fired. Nobody moved. Because everyone sensed the war had already changed. This was no longer about territory, or money, or revenge. It had become a battle between two beliefs. One man believed love was the greatest weakness. The other had finally discovered it was the only thing worth protecting. Police sirens echoed across downtown Chicago. Dozens of patrol cars raced toward the youth center. News helicopters appeared overhead. Television cameras began broadcasting live. Salvatore glanced upward, then smiled. This isn't over. It never is. He entered his limousine. Within seconds, the Romano convoy disappeared into the night. The war remained unfinished, but something far more important had ended. Enzo no longer hid behind the mask he had worn for 20 years. Hours later, the sun began rising over Lake Michigan. The youth center survived. No children died. Several people were injured, but everyone made it home, inside the quiet building. Nora sat alone in the empty gymnasium watching the sunrise through broken windows. Enzo approached carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. He handed her one. Neither spoke for a long time. Finally, she smiled. You know, I was wrong. Enzo looked at her. About what? She laughed softly. I told you. You weren't dangerous. You were just lonely. He waited. I only got half of it right. And the other half? She reached for his hand. Very gently. The dangerous part was never the mafia boss. It was the lonely man who never believed anyone could love him. Enzo looked down at their joined hands, then back at the sunrise. For the first time since inheriting the Moretti Empire, the silence around him no longer felt empty. He wasn't surrounded by bodyguards, or politicians, or frightened allies. He was sitting beside the one woman who had looked past his power and seen the broken man beneath it. She hadn't tried to change him. She had simply refused to fear him. And somehow, that had changed everything. Nora leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. So, do you still think I'm wrong? Enzo smiled, a real smile, the kind nobody in Chicago had ever seen. No, you were right. I was lonely. He paused, his voice quieter than the morning breeze. But you made one mistake. She looked up. What mistake? He intertwined his fingers with hers. You thought loneliness was my greatest weakness. She raised an eyebrow. It wasn't? Enzo looked directly into her eyes. You are, but unlike every enemy I've ever faced, you're the one weakness I'll never fight. Outside, the first rays of sunlight broke through the storm clouds, illuminating the damaged youth center with warm, golden light. The city would remember the night as another chapter in Chicago's endless mafia war. Newspapers would report explosions, police investigations, political speculation. None of them would know the truth. The real battle had never been fought with bullets. It had been fought inside the heart of a man who believed fear was strong, and a woman brave enough to tell the most feared mafia boss in America a simple, unforgettable truth. "You're not dangerous. You're just lonely." She had spent months proving it. He had spent months trying to prove her wrong. In the end, they were both right, because the most dangerous man in Chicago was never defeated by another mafia family. He was defeated by the first person who saw through the monster and chose to stay beside the lonely man instead.